Hi again. For those people who are consistent and brave enough and still following this course, I want to present you today the second part of the 3 lessons on Sveshnikov variation. Today we will consider the main move, bishop g5. It's definitely the most challenging move. Now knight d5 is threatening, so a6 is practically only move for black. Knight a3, and now b5. Well, there is no point. White can also take on f6 first, but then after gf, knight a3, black can just simply play b5 and transpose to the theoretical line, but there are also some other moves like maybe f5, which are not so clear at all. So it's better for, if you are playing white, just go knight a3, because b5 is clearly the best move in this position. It's very logical because white wants, of course, to get his knight closer to the d5 square. So knight c4, knight e3, knight d5, that is a plan for white, and b5 is a very logical move. Actually stopping this knight from getting to d5, and it will take white quite a long time to get this knight on a3 into the game, back into the game. In the meantime, black also threatening simply b4, trying to win a piece. Well, other moves, there are some, bishop e7 can be played, but it's not very logical. I wouldn't recommend you even to study it really with black, because white can just take on f6, play knight c4, and just having a very nice, comfortable plus. So why to give your opponent a chance to get his knight into the game? Also bishop e6 is possible, but it's not doing well at all according to the theory, and with quite normal moves white gets a considerable advantage. I think the main line is bishop f6, and queen f6 is quite sad. Simply better for white, and after gf6, white is starting to maneuver his knight to e3, and there was some tries. Black tried to make it work, but didn't manage. So b5 is the most logical and the best move in the position. So today we are going to study knight d5. This is a kind of positional system. In the last lesson on Sveshnikov, I'm going to show you bishop takes f6 move, g takes f6, knight d5. This system, also very principled, but here the game gets quite sharp. Most of the lines are quite sharp. Black has certain counterplay. Okay, maybe a bit weaker pawn structure than in the variations I'm going to show you today during this lesson, but also black has more counterplay, and it's totally different type of play. So for today we are going to play safe, to play very positionally, very solid positional chess with knight d5 with white. So this I played a million games here with black on the top level. I mean, with all possible best players in the world, with Kasparov, Anand, and many other players. So knight d5 is, of course, a very popular move. Actually, nowadays, still, it's probably even more popular than bishop takes f6, because white has more control on the position, and also because black has to be very accurate here. I mean, if you want to play Sveshnikov with white, then knight d5 can definitely be at least one of your weapons, because after listening to this course, you will have a good knowledge of all the nuances of this system. And if your opponent is not so well prepared, or he missed for some unexplainable reason this course, then you have considerable chances to get a certain pressure out of the opening, a certain advantage. So in general, I had good results with black against knight d5, but I wouldn't say that things were easy. Sometimes I would get worse still out of the opening. Of course, at that time I played a lot in the 90s. This position with black. Of course, there were no engines, or at least they were quite weak, and now the series very much developed. Still I cannot tell you cannot tell you with 100% probability that black is equalizing here. I mean, white in every line, black has a number of possible lines in the main system with bishop e7, which is by far the best move in this position. It's the only move to fight for equality. But there are 3-4 different systems, but in each of those systems, white has some some options to try to fight for advantage, and black is, even if black on the top level most often equalizes, but just one wrong move, one inaccurate move, and white can get a serious advantage. So definitely rather risk-free for white variation if you know well what you are doing, and black must be very well prepared. And for those of you who want to play this line with black, I think that I will give quite a detailed analysis of the state of theory and of the best directions, and of course certain concrete variations. I think that would already be enough if you are not a top 10 player. Would already be enough information, enough knowledge for you to play with black this position. So bishop e7, there was a short moment of popularity of queen a5 check, but after bishop d2, queen d8. In the database you will find a lot of games on queen a5 check, but don't misunderstand. Most of the time it's just a way for players who want to make a draw, who are not in a very fighting mood. This is the simplest way, is just to repeat moves like this: bishop g5, queen a5 check. So it's not because it's such a strong variation, it's just because people wanted to call it a day as quick as possible and to find a way to make a 3 times repetition. And this is already, on move 10 you start to repeat moves. But seriously speaking, this variation is at least dubious. I maybe will go as far as saying that it's practically refuted already, because after a simple bishop d3 move, it seems to be it seems that black is in serious trouble. White just wants to castle, to play c4, to start his action on the king side. And knight takes d5, logical, ed5, knight e7, and now simply castles. Black is really lacking development. He cannot also take the pawn on d5 after bishop e4. He will lose material as well. And let's say if black starts to develop in this fashion, playing g6, bishop g7, then white very quickly starts to break through on the queen side, c4, and in case of bc4, knight c4, then bishop a5 starts to threaten. I mean, a huge advantage in development makes black's position really bad. So probably the best for black is to sacrifice the pawn, to play bishop g7, cb, castle, but white is better for sure. The only question is how much better. So is it a big advantage, or just kind of winning advantage, or simply better? But no doubt queen a5 check is not a good line, and white definitely keeps an advantage here. That's why bishop e7. Of course, a move like bishop e6 would be a mistake, because this you will understand after watching the next lesson on bishop takes f6 gf line, because here bishop e6 in this position, f5 or bishop g7, there are two main moves. Bishop e6 is a mistake, because after, let's say, c3, black will have to play f5 sooner than later, otherwise he will be positionally just have a very bad position. And after f5, ef5, bishop f5, black simply lost the tempo. Let's say knight c2, and black's position is pretty bad here. So actually bishop e7 is the only move. And before going into the details of the main line, bishop takes f6, I want to briefly discuss knight takes e7 move. This move is really harmless, actually, in various ways. In fact, the main line always used to be knight takes e7, and it's absolutely perfectly fine for black. Bishop f6, gf6. So now, if bishop d3, then d5, for instance, is just equalizing. I mean, black has a certain issue with the pawn structure, but very active pieces and healthy position in the center, and the knight on a3 is still out of place, so no problem at all for black. c4 is more challenging. Here black has more than one way to be fine. Maybe the most interesting, actually, trying maybe to fight even for advantage under some circumstances, is just to castle cb f5. A very typical for Sveshnikov variation. So black sacrifices a pawn. Actually, black is better developed, has a better center, and it's good enough compensation for the pawn. Black is perfectly fine. But lately, even queen takes e7, which was always considered to be slightly dubious, but even this move seems to be doing very well, and I can just show you briefly the ideas. It's in a way it's maybe even simpler, because white doesn't have too many options to fight for advantage here. I believe c4 is definitely the only way white can really challenge black in this position. Let's say if c3, then already h6, and white has to exchange on f6 because the pawn on e4 is weak. So after bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, knight c2, let's say castle, knight e3, knight e7. Well, this d5 weakness of this square is not, is not really relevant factor in this position, because black controls it very well and he's better developed, so black is for sure not worse. Then bishop d3, h6, bishop h4, that might make sense, at least that the pawn on e4 is protected. But here again, black is very active, playing bishop e6, preparing d5, or g5, d5, and according to engines, white has to be already careful not to get slightly worse. So c4 is a challenging move, and now knight d4, by the way, not the only move, but the most direct. And black is fine here. Let's say after knight c2, the simplest is actually just to take and play bishop d7, for instance, even though computer engines pretend that after queen b7 black is also fine. But bishop d7, cb, ab, and position is just equal. Then black castles, plays h6, rook fc8. Then what else? Probably the most challenging is c takes b5, because in case of bishop d3, again, black, has different ways of playing, but I believe the most straightforward, the most direct is castles, knight e6, and after, if bishop f6, queen f6, cb5, knight f4, black has very strong counterplay, so white should rather quickly try to make a draw here. And in case of bishop h4, then positions can get very, very unclear and actually quite dangerous for white. Just to give you an example, g5. I think it's a good plan. Bishop g3, h5. Suddenly black starts to be very active on the king side. And so the best line according to engine is h3, h4, bishop h2. And now one of the, not the only way of playing, but I quite liked the king h7 is what is offered by engine. It's just trying to mate, it simply wants to play rook g8. For instance, cb, rook g8, okay, g4 is a real threat. While this knight on a3 is still on the edge of the board, black already starts to a direct attack, so f3 probably is the best. And now knight h5, and then black follows with knight g3, knight f4, a lot of initiative, queen a7 somewhere. For one small pawn, I believe I would definitely take black here, even if the position is objectively equal according to the engines. So knight d4, probably cb5 is a challenging move. And now black can equalize in two ways. One is most very direct, queen b7, attacking the pawn on e4. f3 is not good. Now knight takes c4 is refuting f3 and black is better. So after queen b7, the only reasonable move for white is bishop d3. Knight takes e4, bishop e3. Strangely enough, well, it's not bad for white. After knight c5, white castles, and you can push, the engine button here. It leads to a draw, basically, by force. But also, preparing for this lesson, I also found that castle is actually doing perfectly fine as well, because now, queen b7 is threatening. Well, after bishop d3, you can even simply take on b5 already, or play h6 also. I mean, black has, in general, a very significant counterplay in this position. Well, knight e6 also is fine, yeah? That would transpose more or less to the previous variation, then knight gets to f4. So, after cb5 castle, knight c2 is the best move. And after knight e6, bishop f6, queen f6, ba6, and queen h4. That is a very important move, because it's very uncomfortable for white to, this defense of the e4 pawn, and black's position is fine according to engine's equal position. But in a practical game, maybe even more interesting, so to say, in practical sense, because, for instance, if bishop d3, knight f4 works. So that is a possible variation. Queen e7, maybe if you're playing black, a bit to surprise the opponent, because by far the main move is knight takes e7. So you want to surprise your opponent, maybe queen e7 can be a choice. But again, I would repeat, there is absolutely no problem with knight e7 also. So with black taking on e7 with a knight. So knight takes e7 is, practically disappeared from the tournament practice, on the top level at least. And that is, of course, the top chess players. They know theory better than anyone else, and they work a lot on chess. So to me, it's a clear indicator that this line is not prosperous for white. And actually, it's quite logical, because white's main asset in this Sveshnikov variation is a d5 square, and taking on e7, you more or less you give it up. Yeah, this asset. Of course, you get two bishops in exchange, but frankly, as you saw very quickly, you exchange one of those bishops on f6. So not very logical. I mean, even visually, aesthetically, if I may, bishop takes f6 looks much stronger, because here you see that this beautiful knight on d5 is creating quite some troubles for black. Yeah. Otherwise, of course, black has two bishops, good development, active position, but the control on the d5 square, this knight is still giving white chances to fight for the opening advantage. Here in this position, for many years, white would practically immediately automatically play c3 here, which still I believe is the strongest move, then trying to go knight c2, and we are going to consider it later. But sometime at the end of the 20th century, c4 started to become more and more popular, and was causing black quite some problems for a while. But now I believe black found a very convincing way of reacting against the c4, and again now the the opening fashion started to shift in the direction of the 11 c3 move. c4, well, of course it makes a lot of sense, because white starts to attack on this pawn on b5, and gaining temp is getting his knight into the game, because in this position, well, black tried some moves like knight d4, trying to play for dynamics, sacrifice the pawn, but it didn't really work. I mean, there is some compensation, but at least according to the current state of theory, not completely enough to equalize. So b4 is the most logical normal move. Now queen a4 is a nice trick, but it doesn't work. I mean, white can win a pawn like this, but will probably lose the game. After bishop d7, knight takes b4, and now black has a very powerful initiative. Actually, just black is simply better here. With a queen b6 is a good move, but maybe even better is knight d4, queen d1, rook b8. Now knight has to retreat to d3, very sad, of course, but after knight d5, rook takes b2 is always possible. So knight d3 and bishop c6, and it's already -2 almost according to powerful engine. So white is in deep trouble for one little pawn. Black has a huge initiative, and this is simply unplayable, queen a4. So white has to retreat with a knight on c2. And here, all would be good. That would make a lot of sense for white. The only problem, but a serious one of this setup, is that the d4 square has weakened. And so in a way, this knight on c2 has to stay there and trying to hold the black's knight on c6 from getting there on d4. So whenever white plays knight e3, black can always jump to d4, and this knight on d4 is very powerful. So positionally, c3 is more sound, I would say, because it controls the d4 square. But here white is trying to a different plan than in the main classical line with c3. Here white wants to exchange white color bishops. Then, of course, if he manages this, he would just be much better positionally, but it's easier said than done. So knight c2. Again, black, there was quite a long period of players trying rook b8, because it was considered to be maybe a little bit more accurate than a5. But finally, now I think a5, I'm going to show you the most reliable variation for black, which is now causing white a lot of problem, actually causing white dropping this variation. Quite many players who liked playing it with white, like Nd5, he played many games like that, but now I think he starts to play c3 also, because I believe because of this a5 and the following play, which I'm going to show you. I don't really see... white can still play this position, but I don't really see any realistic chance for white. Again, if black knows exactly what he is doing, any realistic chance to fight for advantage, and pretty often game can become actually very double-edged and very unclear, and maybe under some circumstances I would even prefer playing black those positions which will arise after a5. But objectively they're equal, complicated, so still playable for white. I kind of classical, my classical positional education speaks against having the pawn on c4, limiting your own bishop, white square bishop, and having this hole on d4, potential hole. I don't believe it should give white an advantage, and true, according to theory, black is doing perfectly fine here. So the white's idea is actually trying to exchange the bishop, as I already mentioned, because if he plays in a slow manner, like bishop e2, castles, bishop g5, also if you are not familiar yet with Sveshnikov variations, with those structures, very typical maneuver, bishop gets to g5, because of course it's pretty passive on f6, and on this diagonal, very typical that bishop often finally finds a good square h6, controlling the diagonal, and then one day black tries to organize f5 and organize play on the king side in the center. So the of course also a very typical idea, actually not only for Sveshnikov but for many other Sicilians, is that in case of bishop g4, of course, black simply puts his bishop on e6 and offering white to exchange the bishops, but on his terms. Yeah. Then if you exchange a bishop on e6, then the only actually trouble of black's position, which is the weak d5 square, is disappearing. After fe, black have full control on the d5 square, and not clear at all why he should be any worse. In fact, he's slightly better here. So that's a very typical also idea. You put bishop on e6 and you just stay like this, and most of the time it's not good for white to exchange on e6, and then also this bishop on g4 is sort of hanging at some point. Yeah, not clear what to do next. So that is the idea, of course, on bishop g4, and in case if white plays queen d3, then this slow play is totally harmless. Bishop e6, rook d1, let's say rook b8. Black is playing his usual moves, which you will see a lot during these lessons. During this lesson, it's a very typical setup for black, and then very often he's trying to play king h8 followed by f5. Sometimes on the queen side, b3, white has to watch out for some activation of the rook, like a4, b3. So all in all, I don't see a slightest idea for white in this position. Well, black is not worse at all here, and there is no real plan for white here. So that is completely harmless, of course. Then there is an idea of playing queen f3. Also, I'm not too impressed with it. The only point is that in case of bishop g5, white can try to start some play on the king side with h4, g4. Also, you will see very typical resource for white in this variation with c4 and c3 in both cases. And here, I'm not sure it's so completely clear, but it can get a bit dangerous for black. So after queen f3, again, a big question if white really threatens to take on f6. I'm not completely sure he will really be better there, again, because of this d4 square. But I would recommend you just to play bishop e7. It is a losing attempt, so let's say in case of bishop e2, you castle, and finally you still put the bishop on g5. Well, but queen f3 is not a big tempo, in this position, and in any case it's very healthy for black, this position. So I think that the only real idea behind this variation for white is to try to organize something quick with h4, g3. If you're playing like this, well, even tempi down, half tempi down, I would say queen on f3 is also not brilliantly placed. Black has absolutely no problems. So queen f3, that's why after bishop e7, well, usually white is trying to connect this queen f3 move with the idea a3. That definitely makes sense, trying to to get some play on the queen side. But again, ba3, queen a3, so that's why queen went to f3. So now queen takes on a3, castles, bishop e2, also very typical Sveshnikov position. Bishop e6, castles. Well, black is fine. Here white at least managed to place pretty well his queen on a3, so having certain pressure on the d6 pawn, but still, first of all, there are lots of drawish tendencies. Even if white would take on d5, it would be very difficult. Black would take on d5. It would be very difficult for white to win this position. But of course, you shouldn't do it. Just play bishop g5, rook d1, and now both moves. Rook b8 is fine according to engines. And also queen b8 may be a bit safer, then followed by rook d8 if necessary, protecting this d6 pawn. And also very typical scenario is that even in the worst case, if white at some point attacks and takes this pawn, then black has still a lot of play with two bishops, b line, and this bishop might potentially get to this diagonal somewhere on c5. So all in all, it can only be dangerous tactically. Very concretely. In a long run, black has a very good position, nothing to worry about. So this queen f3 is also pretty harmless, I would say, just that if you know that you can afford losing tempi bishop e7, then I don't think you will get a slightest problem. But the main move is g3. That is the main idea for white. So again, now bishop g5 would be a very logical move, just trying h4, bishop h6, yeah, trying to get this bishop to this diagonal. Of course, with the queen on d1, g4 is already not so dangerous because black can play bishop f4, for instance. But the problem is bishop h3, and actually, of course, if white manages to exchange white square bishops not on e6 but on any other square, then having control of the d5 square, it would definitely be better. Even though still with the bishop on h6, it's still not too bad. I mean, black can defend, but of course it's already quite an achievement for white. But and the point is that typical move bishop e6 doesn't work so well anymore because of tactics, simply tactically. Take on e6 and very unpleasant queen h5 check, which forces black to move his king. So king f8 and white retreats with a knight to e3. Actually, even this position might be, not bad, because computer, again, engines assessing it as only very, very slightly better for white. But at least from the practical point of view, it's unpleasant to play with a king in the center. So that's why bishop g5 is not a popular move here. So white castles. Why bishop g5? Because after castle, well, white's main try is h4. So a multifunctional move. First of all, stopping bishop g5. So somehow, black has a certain issue to solve with this bishop on f6. Okay, we can of course imagine, for instance, if it would stay on c5, oh, that would be great, but it's not easy to get the bishop there. And also in the meantime, preparing bishop h3, trying somehow to exchange this bishop. So another way of playing is bishop g2. This I'm going to show you after. I don't think, again, it's too dangerous, but h4 is, actually, I would say it's idea, as I understand, behind this whole concept of c4 is to play h4 in this position. And, even if there is nothing too dramatic for black, but for quite a while, black was suffering a bit here, in the sense of full equality. But then I think now people found finally, people or engines maybe, but still black found, I think, a very solid and good setup against it. I mean, actually it's not a setup, but it's a very tactical black organizes very quickly counterplay, and it seems to work by tempi. So bishop e6, bishop h3. That is the main idea. I will show you bishop g2 later, but first, the most dangerous, the most straightforward way of playing, bishop h3. So white wants maybe to play king f1, king g2, maybe sometimes bishop f5, h5, I don't know. So black is, having a certain difficulties with his moves, because bishop is on f6. Well, if you play bishop e7, it's also still passive, so you will have to lose some time. Not quite clear what next, because queen d7, knight b6. Even if his position is positionally solid, black is positionally healthy, but a bit uncomfortable still, and white has certain initiative. Of course, there is always an option to take on d5 simply. But that doesn't give full equality, because after c takes d5, now knight b8 is possible, but pretty passive. White should have at least a certain advantage here, for sure, because again, the black square bishop is pretty passive at the moment, and also this bishop on h3 is controlling the c line, so white can potentially get some piece on c6, so this position might be dangerous. And knight d4 then takes, and very important, queen d3 to stop black from activating his bishop, even sometimes by a price of a pawn, playing d3 next. After queen d3, I mean, there is quite a serious strategical danger in this position because, again, the c line is, the c8 square is under control of the white's bishop. Black's bishop is very passive for the moment, and white just wants to enter with the rook on c6, castle, and to start entering on c line. Maybe by tempi, black should try to organize a4, some counterplay, but I wouldn't recommend you. Very dangerous position strategically. So bishop takes d5 probably is not enough to equalize. But then a4, yeah, that is a very important move. I believe that I couldn't really find anything for white after a4, and it's very direct because now black simply wants to play b3 next. And it's not clear what to do against it. So if white tries to stop it with b3, that's actually quite a serious mistake, because now knight d4 and or you can also take on d5 and then knight d4. Computer likes more started with knight d4, and actually in this position white is simply not in time to block this pawn, because for instance after queen d3 you can take on b3 and queen has to take, and then d3, bishop c3, just not good for white, obviously. So b3 is not a good move here. If white is trying to play it slowly, like king f1, a very typical maneuver here, trying to get king to g2 to connect rooks, then already b3, just a direct play, and again you see now black knight secures a very important d4 square, and well, he's having a good position. For instance, ab, knight e3. Now rook a2 actually is very interesting move, just trying already to play for advantage maybe, even if it's still equal. But also knight d4 is possible. You can start with knight d4. If king g2, rook a2, well, almost any other move is also okay for black, because knight on d4 is very, very strong. And even if position is equal, I would prefer playing it with black. Somehow there is because his king is safer, so I don't think it's prosperous for white. And also if you take on 8, queen a8, it's also good for black. Here black wants just to play bishop d8, for example, and taking on f6 is not so good, because then, well, knight on d4 is a bomb, e4 pawn is hanging, and black can only be better here. So maybe white's best is to play knight e3 first, and after knight d4, now black is also trying to play a3, might be threatening a3 under some circumstances. So white can at least block this flank, not to open up the A line, because opponent can get counterplay on the A line, as we've seen in the previous variation. But again, let's say rook c8, rook c1 and g6, I don't really see what is white's plan. I mean, black has some plan. Let's say he wants to play bishop g7, and one day f5 will come, and white's king can get under attack. And what is white's plan, I don't see. I believe that this position is slightly more equal for black than for white. So king f1 is also harmless. And then there are not so many moves. Then we have to consider knight takes b4 is actually just a mistake. I mean, here after knight b4, white should take on e6, transpose into the next line I'm going to show you, but taking the pawn doesn't work because of this nasty queen c8. Attacking the rook on h3, pawn on c4, then pawn on e4 falls, so this is just bad for white. Therefore, what is remaining is bishop e6, f e6, knight takes b4. This attempt, at least white is taking a pawn, but black has a very powerful compensation. Actually, in most of the lines, is getting this pawn back very quickly. Takes queen b6, and now tactically everything works. If knight d3, queen d4, also d5 is good move, but queen d4 maybe is even stronger, and black takes the pawn back with, well, actually some advantage, because knight on d3 is very, very badly placed. So then what else? If a3, everything seems to be under control, but it's not the case, because bishop takes h4 works. Now you see also very typical Sveshnikov play. A lot of tactics, a lot of initiative, and white's king is in danger quite some time. I mean, quite in some lines, black organizes attack against white's king. I won quite a number of games actually with direct mating attack in Sveshnikov. So bishop takes h4, queen e2, bishop g5. So black took the pawn back, and because his white skin is unsecured, black is just better here. So then maybe the best move is queen d2, finally. So now there is no direct tactics, but actually bishop e7 is very unpleasant resource. Now black is threatening d5, the knight on b4 is hanging. And after a3, rook f3. Rook f3 again, so typical Sveshnikov variation. So black is organizing his counterplay from all sides. So rook f3, now what? You cannot really castle because g3 pawn is hanging. Black wants to double on the f line. Sometimes d5, bishop c5 comes. I mean, black's position is probably better already, but at least definitely enough compensation for the pawn. So all in all, I believe this is, well, I would say almost a refutation of bishop h3, a4, because I don't see what white can do, how he can even try to fight for any opening advantage. So then realizing this sad news, white started to play bishop g2 here or one move before, but that is already, you know, that is quite a concession. I mean, playing bishop g2, black is okay, I believe, in different ways. Well, first of all, you can always play a move like rook c8, of course, but already bishop takes d5 is probably enough to equalize, because in this position, queen d3, otherwise black wants to play d3, and now at least black can take the c line. Still, after bishop h3, maybe in a long run, white has some chances to get slightly better. So I would personally, you know, I like g6 simply, a move g6 here. Well, black simply wants to play bishop g7 and rook c8 and maybe f5 one day. So not so clear again, because the knight on c2 is stuck. I mean, once you play knight e3, knight d4 comes immediately. What to do? Bishop h3 now, trying to pretend that g6 is not a useful move. I don't think it is. I think it's quite useful, because black is playing bishop g7. Again, you cannot really take on e6, of course, in these positions, and you cannot castle because bishop on h3 is hanging. So probably white should proceed with h5, but there is no mate here. Yeah, black has not enough resources to organize any serious attack. So let's say rook b8, also very typical move for Sveshnikov variation. Sometime maybe already considering next to play b3, open up the b line for the rook. So let's say queen d3, and now well, basically it's not, white doesn't really want anything, so black can play maybe a4 if you want to play for sharper game, b3, rook a8, with unclear position, quite double-edged, but engines are finding, I don't know how, but they always manage to find some kind of move repetition. So the best, according to engine, is queen c8. I mean, the simplest. Bishop g2, because bishop was hanging, and now queen d8 back. And black wants to play queen g5 at some point. Yeah, and in any case, well, white doesn't really have play. So I would, if I was white, I would already try to repeat moves, because I don't like white's position. In the long run, it's very easy to get worse here with white. So that's why after g6 maybe h5, but again, first of all, you can still play bishop g7, no problem, but already can also get the bishop to g5. You see this march of h pawn can also fire back, because now if white castles, then you know it's probably in black's favor that the h line is open, and if not, then his king is in danger, and I mean potentially, and there is no mate whatsoever on the h line. So let's say queen f3, rook c8, and again, even if position is equal, I would definitely take black here in a practical game. So bishop g2 is harmless, and then what else? You can also play bishop g2 here immediately, but now, first of all, g6 is still fine, just trying to play, in case of castle, bishop g7, bishop e6, and probably next at some point rook c8 and f5 at some point trying to get f5. And in case of knight takes f6, queen takes f6, of course g6 is not a useful move, but at least you don't have this annoying knight on d5. And if as we already know, if another knight trying to go there, then immediately black's knight ending up, on d4. So g6 is also okay, but well, here already I would go bishop g5. Why not? Because h4, bishop h6, bishop h3. Yeah, here already bishop e6. It's tempi up, and you don't have this check on h5. So after bishop g5, castles. Also, there were some games here, but frankly, I think it's already white is trying just something to play the c4 variation, because I think white sort of ran out of ideas and already tried a few times this idea of castle, maybe trying to play f4 next. But yeah, bishop e6. Well, I guess what else? I mean, white doesn't have play actually in this position. So f4 makes sense. Of course, here, but it also, of course, becomes pretty double-edged, because after f4, black squares are open. I mean, some black diagonals, and since black has this bishop, it can become very active. Well, here it works very well tactically for black, because this bishop f6 move is possible here. Of course, bishop is very good on this diagonal, and it works tactically because white can win a piece actually with e5, but black is at least not worse. Knight f6, queen f6, bishop takes e6, but after rook d8, queen e2 has to be played, and because c4 pawn also was hanging, and now ef4, and black has a very powerful initiative. Here b2 pawn is hanging, the white skin is weak, so I wouldn't recommend you, even if probably white with the accurate play can manage to hold this position. It's not something I would recommend you. So f4, bishop here, bishop f6 is doing very well. And if white, for instance, prepares f4, like trying to start with king h1, then black has various options. To me, the most logical seems to be rook c8, and after f4 again takes. I'm not quite sure that white is any better if black just puts a bishop on h4, but again, now already bishop f6 is also possible, because the knight is not hanging on c6. So this operation with e5 is already doesn't lead anywhere. Black just takes on e5, and otherwise the b2 pawn is hanging. So in my opinion, of course there is some more theory after c4, but frankly, in my opinion, black is doing really well here, and I don't find this variation very prospective somehow for white. I mean, unless he manages something very quick and direct, very often in few moves he is getting stuck with his play, and the maximum he can achieve is just making moves, there and back, and that black cannot really improve his position also. But so that's why I just showed you, in my opinion, the best response against b4, and I think it's good enough to think twice whether you want to play the c4 variation or not. So I would, for white players who want to play it with white, I would definitely recommend you to play 11 c3, because it's given, according to the modern state of theory, much more chances for opening advantage, and at the end of the day it's simply much more logical and positionally more sound than c4. But this knight b4 move is not really dangerous. Black simply takes on b4, knight takes b4, rook b6, protecting the pawn on d6, and again, yes, in the wildest dreams, white, of course, would be better if he puts his bishop on d5, but it's impossible to realize. And then, there is not much white can do. For instance, let's just assume knight d5, rook c6, also rook b8 is possible, followed by a5, queen d7, normal moves. H5, H4 sometimes, also F5 at times is in the agenda. not much. There were many games in this type of positions, and nobody really managed to create any problems for black, any reasonable dangerous plan. So this position is, I think, this is really harmless. Okay, just equal position. Again, I guess if you would have a choice what color to play this position with, probably everybody would take white. Nominally, white has a little bit of more comfortable game, but no problem for black also. So that's why Rook b8 was supposed to be simple, easy, and clear equality, more or less kind of dismissing this line from the tournament practice almost. So at that time, everybody was, instead of knight d5, trying to double the pawns, take on f6 with the bishop gf. This will be the subject of the next lesson. And then Gary, he came up with the h4 move, which is actually practically a refutation of this established system for many years, a very solid system, a very powerful move. Not just because it's a strong concrete novelty, but just that he actually understood the whole concept, that in fact a4 is not the only option, that white, it's very important for white to limit this bishop, even by means of keeping his king in the center, playing this strange move h4. Of course, you cannot take the pawn because of queen h5, obviously. And here I played knight e7. Knight e7 because I've seen somewhere in some book that somebody just mentioned that h4, of course, it's not a good move, obviously, because knight e7 is the simplest, one of many ways to equalize, but the simplest is knight e7. But over the board, I started to look at the position, and I somehow didn't quite understand what to do with black. Because the thing is that the very big difference compared to the variation which we have just studied when white is playing c4, b4, with the structure that now in that position the d4 square was weak. So once white would play knight e3, black would immediately jump with his knight to d4. Here this square is under control, and simply white wants to continue knight e3, g3, and actually very often develop a very serious attack. So I think it almost, from time to time somebody still plays this system with black, but frankly, I don't see how to equalize with black. I think white has a very nice plus in this position. Because what to do with this bishop on f6? I don't know. Let's consider moves like bishop e6. Okay, white just goes knight e3, followed by g3, maybe queen f3. Can even potentially organize an attack. And again, there is a big issue with the bishop on f6. Let's say a5, also knight e3. b4 is not really solving all the problems, because then also white gets a very nice square for his bishop on c4, queen on f3. Again, eternal problem with this bishop on f6. Then g6 makes sense, quite similar to that variation with c4. But again, the difference is very big, because white just plays g3, protecting the pawn, then h5. And again, then white has a very important resource, knight e3 in these positions. Let's say bishop e6, knight e3, and he can really organize a very dangerous attack now, like hg, bishop h3, sometimes maybe even sacrificing something on f5. White is, I believe, seriously better here, very dangerous position for black. Let's say knight e7, maybe bishop h3, and this is not the Sveshnikov variation I'm happy with and I'm used to. So also doesn't seem to be great. So I played knight e7. Yeah, this is a principal move actually, but here white is just better. Taking on f6, gf6. And against me in that game, Gary played queen h5. Also a dangerous move, also not easy for black at all. I managed somehow to complicate matters and to get playable position, but then in the next encounter, Gary had this position, I think, against Joel Lothier. already, and he played even better move bishop d3, and this is approved by even modern engines that black is in trouble. Just worse, d5 has to be played, otherwise white will play knight e3 and just all those weaknesses. So d5, e d5, queen d5, knight e3, queen e6, queen h5, f5, long castle. Yeah, and actually black's king, okay, black has some nice center and seemingly decent position, but his king is weak, and white wants also to play bishop c2, bishop b3, very unpleasant maneuver. g4 is on the agenda, so let's say e4, bishop c2, the first line of engine like this, queen g6, and now even queen g5 is very unpleasant move, because, well, the endgame, if you exchange on g5, is really difficult. So I believe rook b8 is almost not playable. I mean, well, it's clearly slightly worse, at least slightly worse, so do not recommend this move. So then, after Gary have practically refuted this variations, okay, this variation, I started to pay much more attention to this line and started to play bishop g5. This is for a long time, yeah, since then it used to be the main theory. I played also again many games here, actually with good results, won some very nice games, with some mating attacks here. I remember against Christopher Lutz in the 90s sometime. Then also I won against Judith Polgar. I think it was 1998, Vaikanze, and made many draws. So actually this system is solid, and I think black, with a very precise play, black is able to equalize, but it's not easy. It's not easy. Black has to be very, very accurate after bishop g5, because also with time white found some new interesting ideas here. So now the point is that, okay, of course, after h4, already bishop h6. Yeah, so I finally managed to find a place for my bishop, and also want to play f5 one day. So the only justification of the move h4 now is to play g4. Yeah, just to mention that, of course, if white plays knight e3, very often black can simply take on e3. That is the idea. So this kind of exchange usually is perfectly fine for black, because he gets control on the d5 square and pretty often manages to push d5 himself, and with very good position. So g4 now. This line is quite tricky, but do not cause problems for black if he knows how to play against it, because f6 is a little bit dangerous. It's not bad. I mean, computer assess it is. Gives some small plus for white, but no more than that. But I don't like, because a4, it's very important move now, and after ba, bishop gets to c4, and from one point of view, white, well, it doesn't really have a terrible attack, but so it's more like weakening a bit his own king. But from the same time, his bishop is on c4, and he gets knight e3 next, and probably it's slightly better for white. I mean, I couldn't manage to equalize fully here with black, but bishop f4 is fine. Bishop f4 is very critical move. Queen f3, it's very direct play, because white will just be worse otherwise if he doesn't attack this bishop, because well, it's very, yeah, I mean, he has weakened his king with those two pawns, and of course white is not mating anymore, not even close. So queen f3, now I can offer you, well, if you want to play this variation, there are two ways of playing. One is solid, bishop e6, actually leads to a pretty drawish position. I mean, endgame pretty forced, knight takes f4, and now queen f6, important resource using the pin. Black actually wants to take with a pawn on f4, followed by knight e5. That's why white has to force black to take with a queen by g5. Queen f4 takes, and even though engines are, well, still showing a very, very minor plus for white, I believe black shouldn't really have any problem here. So it's very solid way. Another interesting, more dynamic, is to play rook b8. And then just trying to organize, I mean, to wait for white to take on f4, because he will do it sooner than later. And then to organize, open up the b line with b4. And actually his counterplay can be quite strong. For example, after knight takes f4, ef4, queen takes f4, b4. Strangely enough, engine already gives quite a considerable plus for black, so he has very strong counterplay on the b line. That's why after rook b8, the best move is bishop e2. So white first tries to remove his king and then maybe to take on f4. But still, for instance, even a5, even a simple move like a5, knight f4 takes b4, and well, even having lost half tempo, I would say, because obviously bishop e2 is much more useful than a5. But even here, black seems to be in time to organize his counterplay. Because he wants bc, rook b2, if c4, b3 comes, so the counterplay comes, yeah, and then white still needs to lose time, probably playing g5 in order to castle. So that is okay. So h4 is kind of tricky if black doesn't know exactly how to play against h4. It can be an interesting try with white, but now you know what to do against h4, and this will not bother you anymore. So a4, that is the main plan. So now white is in time to push a4, ba4. Of course, a big positional mistake would be to play rook b8, ab, because now white has forever this b4 square. Let's say bishop e2, and to start with, simply the pawn on b5 is weak. A line is also in white's hands, and you can never really manage to get rid of this knight on d5, because with the pawn on a5, very often black is playing bishop e6, knight e7, and then let's say throwing away out this knight on d5. Here you cannot manage it, because whenever you play knight e7, white just can put the knight on b4. Very nice knight, and b5 pawn is weak. So just for your knowledge, strategical knowledge, that this structure should be avoided with black. So that's why that makes black practically forced to take on a4. Rook takes a4, a5, bishop c4 is a logical move. Rook b8. This is a big tabby. Most of the time, white would play b3. b4 is too early. Too early here. White haven't castled yet. He's just not ready, not in time by tempo. In general, this is a plan of white to try to organize a pass pawn on the b line, but here after bishop d7, knight takes b4 is threatening, so he has to remove the rook, and ab, knight b4, let's say cb4. Strategically, if white just manages to castle, put queen on d3, rook on b1, he can have a very serious advantage. But bishop e6, now b4 pawn is hanging. After b5, queen c8, bishop is attacked. Very, very important factor that the bishop on g5 is controlling the c1 square. So queen b3, queen c5, and black is definitely fine here. He has a lot of counterplay with rook fc8 and so on, very active pieces, and this b pawn is not really going anywhere. So b4 is premature. Then the most logical and the main move in this position for many, many years was b3. King h8, and now black is preparing f5, because white wants to castle, play queen e2, rook fe1, b4, and okay, the knight on d5 is strong, and black needs to hurry with his counterplay, otherwise he will be worse. So king h8, castles, and f5. I played a few games with g6. I liked this plan for a while. Then my idea was to follow g6 with f5, and after ef, if white takes f, always to take with a pawn on f5. Yeah, I think I won two nice games after g6, those which I mentioned already, but objectively probably it's not enough to equalize, and also again the engines nowadays are a bit skeptical about this move. So finally I also realized that okay, enough is enough. I won two games, excellent, but better not to wait before I will get worse after g6, and to finally analyze this main line, f5, ef5, bishop f5. Well, it actually looks completely fine for black, this position, because he has a b line, active bishops, but things are not so simple here. Knight e3, and now I personally played bishop g6. Bishop e6 is also another option. So bishop g6, and still white is trying here. There are many games on the top level in this position, but it seems that black is holding well here. I mean, against every move, black is in time to create his counterplay sometimes on the king side, against f2 pawn. So I think that if you want, you can study a bit the games of top players in this variation, but I think it's doing fine for black. So that would be actually quite a nice situation for black. So, and I was quite happy with this system. But then in, I believe, 2003 maybe, Ponomarev, of course, against me as usual, if he played a new plan, a very dangerous plan, at least for one game. I managed actually to make a draw. It was, by the way, also a very, very interesting game. You can study it. You can check it. Very sharp and extremely complicated. Ended in a draw, but I think I was out of the opening. I didn't have a good position. So he played rook a2. Yes, this is one of the possible moves also to protect the pawn on b2. It was considered to be quite harmless, rook a2. So not clear why not b3. So I played king h8 and now knight c3, this plan. And the idea was, at least in the books before, that once if white plays knight c3, then already, of course, f5, white will take this white square bishop and be better. But now black can already play g6 and f5, and this knight e3, it's not well placed because black sometimes plays f4 with a tempi. I happily played g6 and then h4. I got h4, which was a novelty, and I realize things are not easy now, because if bishop e3, knight e3, then g6 is really weakening. This h5 is very unpleasant threat. Also, white wants to play b3, rook d2, attacking the pawn on d6. So I closed my eyes and took on h4, which is probably the best move. I mean, at least practically, otherwise black is just worse. And g3, and I realized the attack can be extremely dangerous here. And I played bishop f6, which is, because bishop g5, I was really scared, especially understanding that my opponent is still in his preparation. I'm playing over the board. But bishop f6 is more solid, but actually it's bad. b3, bishop g7, f4, and then rook gets to h2, and actually attack is just unstoppable. White's attack. Fortunately for me, something like that, queen f3 followed by rook h2. Fortunately for me, Ruslan Ponomarev, he decided to go for some sacrifice. He thought it was winning, and finally I managed to escape in, again, a very tense, interesting game. But objectively here, black's position is just bad. So if you already fall into this position, or if you're playing white, that would be even more pleasant. I actually won then once against Luc Van Velde in Monaco Rapid Chess. I won with white already. This variation, bishop g5, you have to play f4, takes, bishop h4 seems to be the only way for black to play. And now white has two moves, both are very dangerous, king d2 and king f1. It is a completely computerish play here. I don't know if maybe black miraculously holds here, but it's extremely dangerous. And I wouldn't recommend you to do it. So knight c3. So this is a serious try. Probably what I would recommend you with black is to take on e3 here, to play like this: knight e3, knight e7, and yes, it's maybe a little bit better for white. Computer gives some very, very small plus, but I believe the draw is pretty close. Let's say castles, and now f5. Of course, black has numerous weaknesses. d6 and a5 pawns are a bit weak, but also there is quite a lot of material is already out of the board, and I believe black should manage to make a draw somehow. Let's say ef5, knight f5, maybe takes b3, followed by rook d2, but also always engine is starting to make some tricks and managing finally. In most of the lines, it gets to 3 against 2 rook endgames, or with queens on the board, but still it's a draw. So maybe this is quite an interesting try for white, and black still has to work to play very accurately. But also this position, this main position, there are also some tries for white. So black probably equalizes at the end of the day here, but things, still white has some prospects. Also, by the way, you can play knight e3 here, because g6, h4, it's a slightly better version for black, because rook a2 is better than b3. But maybe still it's quite dangerous. I mean, let's say takes g3, the same play. It's still not sure if it's good enough for black. The only thing that you can just take and play knight e7 and then followed by f5. I don't know if it's such a big difference. Hard to say. I believe in any case it's pretty close to a draw, but not with every move. I mean, if you just one small mistake, white just manages to stabilize, start attacking these weak pawns, can get really unpleasant for black. So all in all, it's a reliable system for black, I believe. But then lately, actually, the most popular system now is also the one which I want to propose to offer you with black. I mean, to play it with black. I believe it's the most critical test of white setup. White really has to find something very concrete against this system, and now it becomes by far the most popular system against this variation. Most of top players, including Magnus Carlsen, Boris Gelfand, and others, are playing it. And it seems to me, I've checked it quite carefully, it seems to me that black is doing well there, and this is, in my opinion, the most clear-cut and the best probably way for black to play in the system. And I think black has very good chances to equalize. So the most fashionable system nowadays, and now it's considered to be the most reliable, is rook b8, bishop g5 before castles. It's better to start with rook b8. Actually, I would advise you to play first rook b8, because knight takes f6 check is not dangerous. Queen takes f6, white would go knight c2, and now bishop g5. Already, because the point is that h4, now you can simply take on h4. Queen h5 is not, there is no mate on h line, so h4 doesn't work. And in case if you start with bishop g5, then knight c2, rook b8 would transpose to this main line. But white has an additional option h4, because if bishop h4, there is rook h4 and then knight c7. So after bishop h6, he can play knight c2. I'm not quite sure that this is so dangerous, that this is so terrible. I mean, you can, for instance, play castle here and transpose to that position. But still, it just gives let's say g4, bishop f4, which was supposed to be fine for black. But again, just in case not to give white even this chance, I would recommend to start with rook b8. But probably this or that way it gets to this position. So the idea is that once people realize that castles h4, Kasparov idea h4 is very dangerous, so they want to get to the same position, but avoiding this h4 idea. So the point is that in case, again, h4 you just take already. If bishop e2, then you castle. Again, after h4, you can both already play bishop h6, but I guess you can even take on h4. But bishop h6 is safe enough. And already here, knight e3, you always take on e3. Black is practically ready to start some counterplay with f5, but he can also push a5 first. And the most important, white cannot really castle now. And as we already know, bishop g4, you always meet with bishop e6. And ask white what is he going to do next. So that's why castle this position we already checked. Bishop e6, queen d3, a5, or g6, black is perfectly fine. So after rook b8, probably white's best, if not only try to get an advantage, is to play a4 anyway. Somebody tried to play knight e3 here, or a4 ba, knight e3, or knight e3, castles a4, but this is quite harmless. Black can just take on e3, for instance, or first on a4, doesn't matter, queen takes a4, knight e7, and well, he's in time here. I mean, white has a nice structure, but simply there is, well, too big development issue. Yeah, he still needs to develop his pieces, and for the moment the b2 pawn is hanging. Black, in the meantime, will manage definitely to create counterplay or to push d5, and this is quite harmless. So why the system also is good? Because actually white's choice is quite limited of real attempts to fight for advantage. I believe a4 probably is the only try. Now, of course, you know that you shouldn't allow ab. So b takes a4. Rook a4 is harmless because already rook takes b2, takes bishop d7, and black has no problem at all. So knight cb4. That is a serious, very serious attempt. Here you need to know quite some theory, and to memorize it, but at least it's only one line, yeah, and it seems that if you analyze it well, if you remember all the lines, there is a very good chance that black will equalize. So knight takes b4, and white can take with a pawn or with a knight. Knight takes b4 is practically forced draw, I would say. Bishop d7 is an important move, because now if queen takes d6, there is bishop e7. Queen takes e5 castles, and actually here it's already black who is fighting for advantage, because again, development, and let's say takes, then b2 pawn might be lost, and a4 pawn is dangerous. Of course, white will manage to make a draw, but no winning chances. So therefore bishop takes a6 is played, and now queen a5. I don't know if it's really much better for white this position if black plays it slowly, but there is a dangerous plan, bishop d3 followed by rook a3, bishop c2, a4 pawn can become weak. So I wouldn't advise you to do this, even though tactically nowadays engines are managing to hold this, but in fact queen a5 is simple and good. Now white has to take on d6 because rook takes b4 is threatening. So queen takes d6, rook b6, very forced line, queen d3, and now actually both moves, bishop e6 also is holding well, I think, here, but bishop e7 is the simplest, and now it gets very direct play. Knight d5 has to be played. Well, fortunately for white, rook a6, queen a6, yeah, he has this trick, and knight c7 check, so knight d5, rook takes b2, and castles. Now, and in this position, actually, yeah, there were some disputes in the time when engines were not so strong. It was a little bit uncomfortable somehow, but nowadays, actually, engines are equalizing here in almost anyhow. Queen c5 is probably the simplest, and here you can check it with engines. I mean, why black is easily making a draw here. For example, c4, rook b3, and in more than one way, queen e2, bishop d6. I mean, of course, if black just managed to castle, he will be he cannot be worse, but the problem is just that he still needs to stabilize his position too. But black manages in every line here. So the main move is rook b1, takes, castles. Now rook b7 leads nowhere, simply rook d8, because a pawn is also quite dangerous. So tactically, black is in time, and otherwise, well, of course, he's not worse. So bishop b5 is the main move, and now both bishop takes b5, rook b5, queen a7 is practically a forced draw. Also bishop e8 actually is a good move according to engine. Strange move, but also quite good. So this is basically a forced draw, knight takes b4. Therefore, well, all best players, all top players are taken with a pawn now. And here also it's very close. I believe that well, if you analyze this position well, if you just accurately, I think it will be also quite sterilized, you know. Well, here black has two different options. One is like Daniil Dubov, who is also good specialist of Sveshnikov. He is playing like this, bishop d7 in a simple fashion. Bishop d7, bishop takes a6, castles, and now queen e8. because yeah, and then trying to play bishop d8. By the way, it's an important also strategical resource, very typical maneuver in Sampa sometimes. Not too often, but sometimes this idea of transferring bishop to this diagonal via d8, you have to know that it's an option in some positions. So queen a8, b3, I think he had a game against Sergei Karyakin, ab, queen b3, bishop d8, and he, well, managed to make a draw quite easily, king h8, then black is trying to play f5. White still has a very powerful, nice knight on d5, but probably that's not enough for anything really special. But at least white maybe can still try. That's why castle is even more principal. Rook takes a4. And now a5. Now, okay, if you want really to equalize in a very straightforward way, then this is what you should do, because now b5 is practically forced. If rook takes a5, there is rook takes b4. Of course, if rook takes b2, I mean, this is too much. Rook is very active. So the choice is to play b5 immediately or h4. I think h4 is supposed to be more dangerous for black. So you see, Kasparov was right. How often is this h4 is quite dangerous in those positions. Before him, nobody would even imagine that including h4, bishop h6, after which actually white simply cannot castle very often. But in many lines, it is important and it's in white's favor. Why? Because in case of b5, bishop d7, actually the play is forced. Of course, if white just manages to develop bishop c4 castle, he will have a huge positional advantage. But now the pawn is hanging on b5. Knight c3 has to be played, and d5. Actually, engines also saying bishop e7 is okay, but d5 is very direct. Now, well, what to do? Knight d5, bishop b5 will lead to sterilization. Probably everything will be exchanged. Queen takes d5, very important resource, bishop c1. Actually, very unpleasant attacking the pawn on b2, and again, black is fine. After b3, he can play bishop b2, and this is very annoying. So queen d2 takes on c3, takes on b5, and it's only black who can still try a little, but of course it's a draw. So after d5, white has to take ed5, and now e4. Actually, that is a difference, because with a h4, bishop h6 included, e4 is already not so easy for black. But here e4 seems to equalize, because, well, black has sacrificed 2 pawns, but he activated his pieces and starts to make use of his advantage in development, starts to organize a direct play against white's king. So let's say in case of bishop e2, black can play e3, and it's getting pretty dangerous, his initiative. If white tries to get to the same position, h4, bishop h6, but of course now black already put the bishop on f6. And after rook e4, rook e8, well, this is very computerish play, but well, everything checked many times, and everything is fine. Bishop d3, and now, for instance, bishop takes b5 leads to more or less a forced draw. So e4, rook takes e4 is white's best chance, and now f5, and here finally we understand the difference, that with h4, bishop h6 included, white has well, chances for opening advantage by playing rook d4, but here rook d4, bishop f6 is very good, and black is perfectly fine here. So if b5, bishop d7, if white is playing without h4, then it looks pretty forced. I can only add that white can also try to protect this pawn playing queen b3, but then queen is a bit far from the king side, and black, among other ideas, can just start to play king h8, f5, and actually can organize a very dangerous counterplay. Also, there are some ideas of playing rook c8 on the c line, so here black is perfectly fine. So that's why probably the best try for white is to include h4, bishop h6, and now b5. Bishop d7, well, still still that is the main move, even though now already with h4 included, so white cannot castle so easily. I'm not actually sure that black cannot equalize in a simple fashion, playing king h8, if bishop c4 f5, and if bishop e2, which is supposed to be the main line, the first line of the engine, because white wants f5 would be probably a mistake, because now he has g4 and g5, yeah, just tactical. So there is a lot of tactics in this position, but it's pretty direct play, so you can analyze it at home. So king h8, bishop e2, and now, for instance, bishop d7, attacking the pawn, and after knight c3, bishop e6, simply, or even engines are playing rook c8, bishop e6. I don't know if white is really any better here, yeah, so that, because everybody, I mean, most of players are trying to make it force, playing bishop d7, but I'm not 100% sure it's necessary. In any case, so knight c3, now d5, so the same idea, again, all the variations are the same, if white takes with a knight or with a queen, so ed5. But now e4 is already not so clear. I mean, rook takes e4, f5, rook d4, and here again, black has chances to make a draw. Maybe it's even objectively close to a draw, but it's not 100% sure. That's why actually already here h4 is played, so the king, white's king, is not so safe anymore. So now f5. Black is playing, actually just playing 2 pawns down, but having, of course, full control on the black squares, and actually playing a slow game just for compensation. And this position is very, very complicated. It's very hard to assess it. Even engines at the beginning gives a very serious advantage to white, because two extra pawns, but then starts to drop, and finally giving it as equal. So extremely complicated position with mutual chances, well, plays for 3 results. So bishop e2 is the best move probably. Now king h8. And for example, in case of white castles, then the best move probably is g5 now. I mean, black starts, real attack on the king. Sometimes rook g8, rook b6, rook g6, or something. I mean, extremely complicated play. Very unclear position. Or white sometimes can play g3 just to, well, now g5 obviously is not so good because the h line. But now, for instance, there are some tactical opportunities like f4 and some crazy variations. For instance, one of the important lines is in case of g4, f3, bishop takes f3, bishop c1. Attacking the pawn on b2, and it seems that besides, well, still black is 2 pawns down, but he has quite a considerable counterplay in this position. Well, actually, at the beginning it was only 1 pawn. Sorry, yeah, at the very beginning here, after d5, ed5, f5. I mean, here it's 2 pawns. Here actually black is just pawn down. So all in all, this position has to be analyzed, but it was already played quite many times in serious games, also in correspondence chess, and it seems that black is doing fine here. I mean, white is also, if he knows what he is doing, is not risking to be worse, but in a practical game, again, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't feel very comfortable with white, with this king in the center. So, and on top of that, as I mentioned already, there are some ideas like king h8 or Dubov's idea to play without a5 at all. I mean, to keep the a4 pawn instead of a6 pawn. So all in all, I think this system is in the current situation in the theory, it's the most reliable, and it's if you play with white this line, this is the first thing you have to check. You have to try to find something against this system. With black, I believe a little bit of maybe more work, if you're a professional chess player, it can be done with engines, but in general, I think it's quite difficult for white to find something already, because play is pretty direct, at least in those lines where white is really trying to fight for advantage. So that is the situation about this this positional variation of bishop g5 knight d5 against Sveshnikov, Chelyabinski variation, also Sveshnikov variation. Yes, you see that it has venom. I mean, it's not easy at all for black, and if black doesn't know all those nuances, move orders, details, he can easily end up in a very, very unpleasant position. So you can play it with white for sure, and again with black, I think you already have enough knowledge to play. You can still make a bit of work, but I believe it's already practically enough, especially if you are not, again, a top grandmaster. So this system, rook b8, bishop g5, but also the old castles bishop g5 system, I believe it's also very holdable. So that was about the knight d5 move, this positional system, and tomorrow during the next lesson, we are going to finish studying Sveshnikov variation, and we move to this very sharp bishop takes f6, gf6 lines.